The coffee in my cup had long since gone cold. I sat looking at the calendar with the red X marking exactly 1 year since Elliot's funeral. My house in Villa Park, once filled with the sounds of family life, was now just a brick and wood box where I was living out my days. 68 is an age when you don't expect things to change for the better. I ran my hand through my gray hair, still damp from my morning shower. The habits of 36 years in the tax office hadn't gone away. Rising at 6 in the morning, 20 minutes for water, a fresh shirt even on my day off. Some people called me old-fashioned. Elliot preferred the word pedantic. Sometimes it sounded like a compliment, more often a reproach. Wiping my round, thin-rimmed glasses, I glanced at the picture of my son on the table. The only child Mildred and I had been able to have. He was 22 in the picture, his college graduation, the last day I'd been proud of him without a dash of disappointment. After that, our paths diverged. He went to California to develop software. I stayed in Villa Park, enforcing the fiscal discipline of the townspeople. Mildred tried to keep us in touch, but she passed away 8 years ago. Cancer left no time for reconciliation. In the last 3 years of his life, Elliot tried to repair our relationship. He moved back to Villa Park, set up a branch of his company, Trentsoft, bought a house in the suburbs. I was wary, like a man too used to looking for tricks in other people's tax returns. I didn't believe in the sincerity of his desire to connect. Now that he's gone, that suspicion seems ridiculous and cruel. The car accident was sudden. Ice, skid on a curve, tree by the side of the road. Instant death, the doctor said. Consolation for the living is that he didn't suffer, but that doesn't make it any easier, especially when you realize how many words were left unspoken. I remembered our last conversation. Elliot had come to my house unannounced Friday night. Just knocked on the door, holding a bottle of whiskey, my favorite kind. We sat on the veranda drinking small sips and talking about work. He told me about the new Trentsoft project. I recalled amusing incidents from the practice of a tax inspector. Nothing personal, nothing about our relationship. Elliot twice started the phrase, "Dad," I wanted to say, but both times he cut himself off and turned the conversation to something neutral. And I didn't ask. My son died 3 days after that evening, taking the unspoken words with him. His relationship with his wife, Olivia, hadn't worked out from the beginning. They met at a software developers conference in Chicago. She worked as an administrator for an insurance company and was responsible for organizing the event. The marriage was hasty, just 4 months after they met. Mildred and I hadn't even had time to get to know our future daughter-in-law. Olivia Frost was a tall blonde with a straight back and a look that rated everyone on a scale of usefulness. I've seen them in my line of work. They always know how to capitalize on any situation. When Elliot was alive, she was distant but polite. After his death, there was an invisible but tangible wall between us. Glancing at my watch, I realized it was time to pack. Today I decided to pick up the last of my personal belongings from my son's house. The few programming books he'd lent me in an attempt to explain his work, and the chess set I'd given him for his 35th birthday. We only managed to play a couple games before he died. Pulling an old coat out of the closet, I noticed how frayed the sleeves were. Mildred would have insisted on buying a new one, but there was no one to keep an eye on my closet. And why would a 68-year-old widower need a new coat? No one to impress. The bus to the suburbs ran once an hour. I preferred public transportation. After retirement, my old Toyota sat idle in the garage most of the time. The trip took 20 minutes, and soon I was walking down Maple Street toward number 17, a 2-story brick building with white shutters and a neat lawn. Elliot always said he'd bought this house because it reminded him of our family home, the one he'd grown up in. I never admitted it, but I was touched by that sentimentality. Maybe we had more in common than I thought. As I approached the house, I noticed that the garden gnomes that Elliot had loved and Olivia had made fun of were gone. In their place were the fancy wrought iron garden lights along the path. The changes began outside. I pressed the bell and heard the melodic chime inside the house. A minute later, the door opened and Olivia appeared on the doorstep. Her blonde hair was gathered into a flawless bun, her makeup emphasizing her high cheekbones and blue eyes. She looked as flawless as ever, but something about her look had changed. Perhaps the new blouse, silk, ivory, obviously expensive. "Oswald," she said my name without much warmth, but with a polite smile. "I wasn't expecting you today." I called yesterday, I reminded her. Said I'd come to pick up the books and chess. A slight shadow of confusion crossed her face, but it quickly disappeared. Of course, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind. Come in. I stepped over the threshold and the smell of the house hit my nostrils. Fresh baked goods, lemon cleaner, and something else that hadn't been here before. Tarte men's cologne. Olivia led me into the living room, where Elliot's photos still hung on the walls. But on the mantelpiece where our family picture used to be, Elliot between Mildred and me on his graduation day, there was now a vase of lilies. Have a seat, Olivia said. Would you like some tea? No, thank you. I remained standing. I won't be long. I'll just get my things, and then I'll be on my way. She nodded, clearly satisfied with my answer. The books are in Elliot's office, and the chess, she thought for a moment. I think they're in the pantry. Wait here, I'll get them. She left the room and I was left alone, looking at the changes that had taken place in the last few months. The new cushions on the couch were dark blue with a silver pattern, not Elliot's style, which favored simplicity. A glass and chrome coffee table instead of the old wooden one. And an almost unnoticeable detail, a second TV remote, clearly male, with worn buttons and fingerprints on the casing. Elliot had never been an avid TV watcher. When I'd ask him about the new shows everyone was talking about, he'd quip, Dad, I'm writing code faster than those shows come out. Whose second remote is that? As I passed the dining room table, I noticed 2 wine glasses left to dry on a napkin. One had lipstick marks on it, the other didn't. 2 glasses, 2 people. 1 year after my son's death, and Olivia is no longer alone. That shouldn't have hurt me. After all, I'd never been close to my daughter-in-law. But something inside me squeezed at the thought of my son's memory, being so quickly erased from the house he'd bought with so much love. Olivia's footsteps made me step away from the table. She returned with a chessboard under her arm. Here, I found it, she handed it to me. You'd better look at the books in the study. I don't know which ones you need. I took the chess and ran my hand over the carved wood, a gift I'd spent almost a month's pension on. Elliot was touched. I remember his face when he opened the box. Okay, I said. Will you show me where the office is? Sure, her smile became strained. Only it's a bit of a mess. I haven't gotten through all his papers yet. We went up to the second floor. The door to Elliot's office was ajar. It was indeed chaotic inside. Papers on the desk, folders on the floor, a few boxes against the wall. But it wasn't the chaos of work, it was the chaos of searching. Someone was clearly going through his son's things. I'll leave you to it, Olivia said. I've got a phone call. As soon as she came out, I started looking around. The bookshelves, once neatly organized with technical books, were now half empty. Elliot's company papers were on the table. I recognized the Trentsoft logo on the folders. Next to it was a framed photo of Elliot and Olivia against the lake, both smiling. One of the few pictures where Olivia's smile seemed genuine. I opened my desk drawer, looking for the books I'd borrowed from my son. They were there, all 6 volumes, neatly stacked. Elliot was as pedantic about his books as I was. Nearby lay a notebook with his notes, in illegible handwriting that I always criticized. How do you parse what you've written yourself? I asked. The important thing is that the computer understands my code, Dad, he replied with a chuckle. I flipped through the notebook. Technical notes, scraps of code, some schematics. Nothing personal. Nothing that would help me better understand my son after his death. Olivia's voice came from the hallway. She was on the phone, quiet but emotional. Perry, you don't understand. He's here, going through Elliot's papers. No, I don't think he's going to understand anything. Yes, I'll try tonight. Of course, I remember what's at stake. I quickly stacked the books and closed the drawer. Who's Perry, and what's at stake? Olivia showed up at the office door. Did you find what you were looking for? Her voice sounded tense. Yeah, here they are. I pointed to the books. They're all there. Good, she tried to smile. Anything else? I glanced around the office, trying to memorize what the room looked like. Something told me it was important. No, that's it. I picked up the books. Thanks for your help. We went downstairs. In the hallway, I noticed a man's coat hanging on the rack. Dark gray, expensive, brand name label. It wasn't Elliot's, who preferred jackets and unassuming jeans. Whose is this? I asked, pointing to the coat. Olivia looked confused for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. My brother's. He was visiting me this weekend. She glanced at her watch. I'm sorry, Oswald, but I have a meeting in half an hour. I didn't know you had a brother, I said, remembering that Elliot had never mentioned Olivia's relatives. Half-brother, she answered quickly. On my father's side. We'd recently reconnected. I nodded, pretending to believe her. Elliot had mentioned once that Olivia was an only child, and her parents had divorced when she was very young. Her father left for Europe and never kept in touch with his daughter. Where did the half-brother come from? By the way, I noticed a box of Elliot's stuff downstairs, I said casually. You're giving it to charity? A light blush colored her cheeks. Yes, it was time to move on. It's been a year. Sure, I nodded. It's just weird to see his favorite sweater in that box. He's never parted with it. Life goes on, Oswald. Her voice took on a steely tone. Elliot would have understood. I didn't argue. Opening the front door, I stepped out onto the porch. Olivia was standing in the doorway, clearly anxious to close the door. Goodbye, Oswald. Take care of yourself. You too, Olivia, and you. The door closed and I stood on the porch, clutching my books and chess. Olivia's phone conversation with someone named Perry, the man's coat in the hallway, and my sister, in-laws' strange behavior were all running through my mind. Something was going on in my son's house, something I didn't understand. Walking down the driveway, I looked back at the house once more. The sun was reflecting in the upstairs windows, making them look like eyes watching me. Olivia's silhouette flashed in one of them, watching me walk away. Dropping my hand into my pocket, I fumbled for my house keys and suddenly realized that I hadn't felt this. Alive in a long time. Alive. In the year since Elliot's death, I'd existed by inertia, like a running machine. Now something had changed. Perhaps I had finally found a way to do for my son what I hadn't been able to do in his lifetime. To understand what was going on in his house and with his wife. As I walked out to the bus stop, I decided that I would definitely come back. And next time, I would be more observant. The bus bounced on the potholes of the road, and I stared out the window, not noticing the scenery. The sun was setting, painting the streets of Villa Park with warm colors, but my thoughts were far from that idyllic picture. Olivia's strange behavior, her phone conversation with the mysterious Perry, the man's coat in the hallway, it was all adding up to a mosaic I couldn't quite make sense of yet. The bag at my feet held the chess and books I'd picked up from my son's house. I ran my hand over the spines of the volumes, remembering how Elliot had tried to explain the basics of programming to me. Look, Dad, it's like filling out a tax return. Only the computer doesn't forgive mistakes even for the most charming taxpayers, he joked. I smiled but never fully understood his work, and now I regretted it. The bus stopped 3 blocks from my house. I got off, nodding to the driver. Roy, who had been driving me for about 15 years. He knew about Elliot's death and always asked how I was holding up. Today I just waved my hand, not ready for another conversation about how time heals. My street was quiet, as it always is at this time of day. The neighbors had already returned from work, but hadn't yet gone out for their evening walks. Old maple trees cast long shadows on the sidewalk. My house, a one-story with faded blue paint and a small porch, seemed smaller and older than when Mildred and I bought it 40 years ago. I walked up the steps, put the key in the lock, and froze. Something scratched my consciousness. Something important related to today's visit with Olivia. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to grasp the elusive thought, then shrugged and walked into the house. The inside smelled uninhabited. Despite my pedantic cleaning, the house had lost that special scent that a woman made. Mildred always baked on weekends, and the scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the rooms. Now the place smelled only of cleaning supplies and a little dust. I set the bag on the kitchen table and started sorting things out. The chess set went on the shelf in the living room, next to the chess clock Elliot had given me for my 65th birthday. You'll have to play faster now, Dad, he teased me. The watch was never used. We didn't have enough time to play the constrained game. I decided to put the programming books in the study, where I kept the paperwork from the IRS and my small collection of detectives. Opening the door to the study, I felt a familiar calm. This was my territory, with papers neatly laid out, pencils sharpened to perfect sharpness, and folders signed in my smooth handwriting. On the desk was an old framed picture of Elliot. He was about 12, holding his first computer, a bulky box that had cost Mildred and me 3 of my paychecks. But how his eyes shone. "Thank you, Daddy. This is the best gift in the world," he exclaimed, hugging me tightly. After that, these hugs became less and less frequent until they stopped altogether. I put the books back on the shelf and suddenly froze. A folder. The folder with the copy of Elliot's will. It should have been here, in the top drawer of the desk where I kept my most important documents. I pulled the drawer open and looked through the contents. Insurance policies, bank statements, house deeds, all in place. But not the will. A chill ran down my spine. Where is it? I methodically checked the rest of the drawers, then the file cabinet. Nothing. My memory prompted a picture of me sitting in this very office 2 weeks ago, looking through Elliot's will. I remember being surprised by its contents. And then what did I do? I put it back in the folder. And the folder. Suddenly it hit me. I'd brought the folder with me the last time I'd gone to Olivia's house to show it to the lawyer I'd arranged to meet with after visiting my sister-in-law. But the lawyer called and rescheduled the consultation. And I left the file at Elliot's house. My heart is racing. If Olivia finds that file, she'll know what I know about the will, that her husband left me half his share of the company. Suddenly, the scraps of the phone conversation I'd overheard today took on new meaning. "He's here, digging through Elliot's papers." "No, I don't think he's found it." "Yeah, I'll try tonight." "Of course, I remember what's at stake." What if she had already found the folder? What if this mysterious Perry is helping her get rid of the will? I rushed to the phone and dialed my son's number. It was ringing, but no one answered. Of course, Olivia wouldn't pick up when she saw my number. Not now, she wouldn't. Glancing at my watch, I realized I had a chance to catch the last bus to the suburbs. If I got off right away. Wasting no time getting changed, I grabbed my jacket and keys and ran out of the house. It was 4 blocks to the bus stop. It was a challenge for my 68 years, but adrenaline drove me forward. I couldn't let Olivia destroy my son's last will and testament. Breathing heavily, I reached the bus stop just as the bus pulled up. The driver was no longer Roy, but a young guy who nodded indifferently, accepting my change. I sank down into the seat, trying to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. What did I know for sure? Elliot had left a will that gave me half of his share of Trentsoft and all the copyrights to the software he'd developed. Olivia would get the house and personal effects and the other half of the company. I estimate that Elliot's stake was worth several million. His startup had attracted investors and was growing rapidly. But was Olivia aware of this distribution? Judging by her behavior and her attempts to hide Elliot's stuff from me? Probably not. Or she knew but didn't accept this state of affairs. I thought back to the day Elliot handed me a copy of the will. It was a week before he died, during our last meeting. We were sitting on the veranda of my house drinking whiskey and talking about nothing in particular. "Dad, I want you to keep something for me," he said suddenly, pulling an envelope out of his inside jacket pocket. "What is it?" I asked, accepting the envelope. "A copy of my will. Just in case." He smiled, but something troubling flashed in his eyes. "Just keep it with you. I hope you don't need it for a long time." "Why are you giving it to me? Your lawyer should have a copy." Elliot averted his gaze, looking out at the sunset. "Yes, of course, but an extra copy wouldn't hurt. I made some changes recently and—" He paused, then continued with feigned ease. "Anyway, just keep it, okay?" I didn't push for an explanation. Our relationship was just getting better, and I didn't want to ruin it by being too curious. Now I regretted it. What had made Elliot change his will? And why was he worried about the safety of the copy? The bus stopped at a stoplight, and I saw through the window a young couple with a child. The boy, about 5 or 6 years old, was holding both his parents' hands, and they were rocking him together, making him laugh with delight. That's how Elliot had once been, carefree, laughing, trustingly placing his palm in my hand. When did we lose that connection? Probably after I didn't show up for his school play because I had an important test, or when I criticized his decision to study computer science instead of law, or when I treated the news of his engagement to Olivia coldly, saying that 4 months isn't enough time to get to know a person. Little cracks that eventually turned into a chasm. Still, in recent years, Elliot had tried to mend our relationship. He came back to Villa Park, called regularly, invited me to dinners. I'd responded with restraint, still resentful of his years of estrangement. Now I'd give anything to get back at least one of those evenings and tell my son how proud I was of him. The bus was approaching the suburbs. Neat houses with manicured lawns floated past the window. The neighborhood where Elliot had settled. A successful IT guy, founder of a growing company, husband to a beautiful woman. He had everything one could dream of. Or did he? In the last months before his death, he seemed tense, often canceled our appointments, citing work. When we did see him, he was distracted, always checking his phone. I chalked it up to the stress of running a company. Now, thinking back on his behavior, I wondered if there was a problem in his marriage. Olivia had always struck me as calculating. She was 6 years older than Elliot, and behind her impeccable manners, I sensed a cold calculation. But my son was in love, and I was too critical an old man for him to listen to my doubts. And now Olivia seems to have found a new companion. This Perry guy. Who is he? A lover? An accomplice? And what are they up to? I flinched as the bus slowed abruptly at my stop. Stepping outside, I took a quick step toward Elliot's house. Dusk was settling in, and the streetlights were coming on. The lights were on in the windows of the houses, some of them showing the silhouettes of families gathered for dinner. An ordinary evening in the suburbs. But for me, it was an evening to protect my son's legacy. As I approached the house, I noticed lights on in the first-floor windows. That means Olivia's home. What if Perry was there too? I slowed down, thinking about the situation. I couldn't just knock on the door and demand the file. You have to have some kind of pretext. I stopped across the street from the house, hidden by the shade of a large oak tree. What would I say? That I forgot an important document? But then Olivia would realize I knew about the will. What if she'd already found the folder and destroyed the contents? Suddenly, the front door of the house opened, and Olivia appeared on the doorstep. She was dressed differently than she had been during the day. A tight black dress, high heels, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was followed by a man, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit. The same man who owned the gray coat? Most likely it was the mysterious Perry. I instinctively retreated deeper into the shadows, watching them get into a black sedan parked outside the house. The car moved, and I saw Olivia laughing at something her companion had said. Free, relaxed. I'd never seen her like that, not even with Elliot. When the car turned the corner, I quickly crossed the street and walked toward the house. Now I had the advantage of Olivia's absence, so I could look for the file in peace. But how to get in? I walked around the house, remembering that Elliot often left a spare key under the vase at the back door. Old-fashioned and unsafe, Dad, but handy when you forget your keys, he used to say, waving away my moralizing. The vase of geraniums stood in the same place. I lifted it, and indeed there was a key underneath. I smiled at the fleeting thought that my son's foresight was now playing into my hands, and inserted the key into the lock. The door opened silently. I stepped into the dark kitchen, carefully closing the door behind me. The house was silent, only the clock ticking somewhere in the living room. I didn't turn on the light for fear that the neighbors would notice the activity in the absence of my hostess. Instead, I took out of my pocket the small flashlight I always carried, another habit of the pedantic tax inspector. The beam of light slid across the kitchen countertop, revealing an open bottle of wine and 2 empty glasses. The remains of dinner, cheese, grapes, bread, lay on the table. A romantic evening interrupted for some important meeting. I walked through the kitchen into the living room, then up the stairs to the second floor. Elliot's office was at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, and I cautiously stepped inside. The room was in even more disarray than it had been during the day. Desk drawers were pulled out, papers strewn across the floor. Someone was obviously looking for something, perhaps the will folder I'd left here on my last visit. I began to look around the room methodically, trying not to make any noise. My flashlight beam glided over the shelves, the desk, the boxes against the wall. The folder was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the phone rang in my pocket. I flinched in surprise and quickly turned off the sound. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. I dropped the call. Now was not the time to talk. As I continued my search, I noticed that one of the books on the shelf was not as level as the others. Elliot, like me, was a pedant about his library. He would never leave a book in that position. I pulled on the spine, and the book pitched forward, revealing a small space behind it. And there was my folder, tucked behind the books, hidden from casual glance. Someone had found it and hidden it. But why hadn't they destroyed it? I opened the folder, checking the contents. The will was in place, all the pages intact. I quickly flipped through the document, making sure nothing had changed. Yes, it was just as I remembered. Half of Elliot's share of the company went to me, half to Olivia. Plus, the copyrights to the software went to me, the house and personal property to her. Now I understood why Olivia might have been unhappy. Trent Soft was growing fast, and her half share was worth millions. But full control of the company, which would give her all 100%, was worth much more. And with the copyrights to Elliot's designs included, it was tens of millions. Elliot was no fool. He knew his wife's character better than I did. That's why he changed her will shortly before she died. That's why he gave me a copy in case anything happened to the original. The door slammed downstairs. I froze, listening. Footsteps on the stairs. Two voices, a woman's and a man's. Olivia and Perry had returned sooner than I'd expected. I'm sure he didn't suspect a thing, Olivia said. The old man's too wrapped up in his grief to notice anything. Don't underestimate him, the man's voice replied. He was a tax inspector. Those people are naturally suspicious. Perry, trust me, he doesn't know anything about the will. I checked his reaction today. He didn't even mention it. Where's the original? Did you find it? Not yet, but it should be here in the study. Elliot always kept important documents at home. Footsteps approached the study. I quickly slipped the folder into the inside pocket of my jacket and looked around for cover. A closet? Too obvious. Behind the curtains? They were too thin. Under the table? No, they'd noticed right away. The door started to open wider. I had only seconds left. I slid behind the large bookcase in the corner of the office, following instinct rather than reason. The space between the wall and the cabinet was narrow, barely enough to squeeze in, but at my age, thinness was an advantage. I held my breath, clutching the precious folder containing Elliot's will to my chest. The lights flared, flooding the room. I could only see part of the office through the gap between the cabinet and the wall, but it was enough to make out Olivia and the man who'd entered with her. Tall, trim, with perfectly styled dark hair and a tenacious gaze. Exactly the kind of man I'd pictured named Perry when I'd heard the phone call. Start at the top and I'll check the desk drawers, Perry ordered, getting straight to the point. We need to find the original today. Olivia sighed, walking over to the bookshelf, the same one where I'd just found the copy of the will. I pressed myself into the wall, praying she wouldn't notice that the books weren't facing the same way. I've already checked everything in here, she said irritably. Twice? It's not on the shelves. Check it again, Perry insisted. Elliot was a pedant. He could hide a document among books that were rarely opened. While Olivia reluctantly looked through the spines of the books, Perry methodically pulled out the drawers of the desk, going through the papers. Did you find anything from the notary? Olivia asked, still in the middle of her work. Perry shook his head. No. According to their records, Elliot had taken the original will after it was drafted, said he wanted to make changes, but didn't bring a new version. And that was 2 weeks before the accident. Olivia turned to him. Do you think he had time to change the will? I don't know, but he was definitely planning something. Perry slammed the last drawer shut. Shit, it's not here. I watched them, barely breathing. So Elliot took the original will to the notary 2 weeks before he died. A week later, he hands me a copy. What happened in between? What made him change the will and worry about keeping the copy? What if he gave it to his father? Olivia suddenly asked. The old man was here today, hanging around. Maybe he was looking for the original. Perry frowned. Had he said anything about a will? No, just took the books and the chess. But he looked at me strangely. Olivia bit her lip. I'm not even sure he knows about the will. Elliot wasn't particularly close to him. But they'd been seeing more of each other lately, hadn't they? Perry continued to pace around the room, examining every corner. Elliot could trust him to keep the document. I gripped the folder tighter. No, my son didn't trust me with the original, only the copy. But then where was the original? And why are Olivia and Perry so desperate to find it? If the old man has the original, we're screwed, Perry said gruffly. He could produce it at any moment. No, Olivia shook her head. If he had the original, he'd have done it by now. It had been a year since Elliot's death. Oswald wasn't the kind of man who would wait. I almost snorted. How poorly she knew me. I could wait for years if the case required it. A tax inspector, especially one dealing with evaders, must have the patience of a fisherman. Then where the hell is that document? Perry slammed his fist down on the table with force, making me wince. Olivia walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Calm down, we'll find him. Her voice was soft, seductive. And if we don't, we have a backup plan, remember? Perry looked at her, and his face relaxed a little. Yes, there is, but a clean original would be much better. Of course, Olivia agreed. But even without it, we can proceed. You're a lawyer, Perry. You know your way around the law. Lawyer. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Perry wasn't just Olivia's lover, he was a lawyer. Perhaps the same one who drafted Elliot's will? That would explain a lot. I work in corporate law, not probate law, Perry grumbled. But yes, I know the loopholes. If we can't find the original, we'll have to use them. Olivia moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. And then we'll have everything. The whole company, the patents, the house, all of Elliot's assets. And no one will be able to challenge your inheritance. Perry put his arm around her waist, especially his boring dad. They kissed and I stood behind the closet, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. These two weren't just cheating on my son in his lifetime, they were now planning to steal his legacy. But first we need to find the original, Perry said, pulling away. Sure might want to destroy it. And if we don't? Olivia asked. Then we'll create a new one, Perry answered with cold certainty. I have a sample of Elliot's signature. I can make a new will, dated later than the copy we saw. It would make you the sole heir. What about the notary? Olivia seemed worried. He'll spot the forgery. We don't need a real notary, Perry grinned. An imitation seal and signature would suffice. It might not hold up in court, but it's enough for the initial inheritance. Once you have control of the company and all the assets, it'll be too late to challenge anything. Olivia smiled, but then her face turned serious again. What if his father does know something? If he has a copy? Then we'll have to convince him not to get involved, Perry said in a tone that sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? Olivia seemed to tense up too. Nothing criminal, Perry answered quickly. Just a conversation, maybe with the implication that if he insisted on his rights, some not-so-pleasant details about his tax career might come out. You have something on him? Olivia wondered. No, but he doesn't know that, Perry grinned. Most people, especially those who've worked in government, are afraid of even the hint of scandal. The old man's at an age when he doesn't want to risk his reputation. I listened to them, feeling my initial excitement being replaced by cold fury. Not only were they planning to steal Elliot's inheritance, but they were willing to blackmail me into silence. Okay, Olivia said after a pause, but let's find the original first. It's got to be here somewhere. They resumed their search, and I continued to stand behind the closet, listening to their every word and movement. My back began to whimper from the uncomfortable position, but I didn't dare move. Did you check the bathroom? Perry asked. The toilet tank? The air vents? Yes, I checked everything, Olivia said irritably. I've lived in this house for a year, Perry. I've had plenty of time to explore every nook and cranny. Then maybe he kept it somewhere else, Perry suggested. In a safety deposit box? In the office? In the office, I checked. Nothing, Olivia sighed, and he never mentioned a safety deposit box. They were silent, and I could only hear the rustle of the papers they were going through. Then Perry suddenly said, Wait a minute. What if there's no original at all? What do you mean? Olivia paused. What if Elliot took the will to the notary, but never made a new one? What if he just destroyed the old one? There was a pause, and I could almost see the gears turning in Olivia's head. Then the inheritance would be distributed according to the law, she said slowly, like for someone who died without a will. I, as the widow, would get everything. Exactly, Perry confirmed. Unless there's a valid will, you'll inherit all of Elliot's property as his legal spouse. His father gets nothing. But if there's a copy, Olivia started. A copy is only valid if you can't produce the original, Perry explained. If we claim that the original was destroyed by Elliot because he changed his mind, the copy becomes invalid. I clenched my teeth. They were right. Without the original, the copy I was holding on to could be worthless, especially if Perry, as a lawyer, manipulated the system. But there's a risk, Perry continued. If his father produced the copy and could prove that Elliot hadn't intentionally destroyed the original, the court might find the copy valid. And how would he prove that? Olivia snorted. Elliot's dead. He can't confirm or deny anything. True, Perry agreed. But it's better to be safe. Let's keep looking. If we find the original, we destroy it. If not, we go with Plan B. We'll make a new will or declare that there isn't one. Olivia nodded and went back to searching the room. I stood still, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The situation was worse than I'd realized. These two didn't just want to change Elliot's will. They planned to disinherit me completely. Not that I needed the money or a stake in the company. I'd lived a modest life on a civil servant's salary and was now quite content with a pension. But it was my son's last will and testament. He wanted me to be part owner of his company, wanted me to keep his copyrights. Maybe it was his way of reconnecting the connection we'd lost in his lifetime. And I couldn't let those two steal that from me, from both of us, me and Elliot. Oh, shit, Perry said suddenly, looking at his watch. It's 9 o'clock. I have to go. I have to get up early for work tomorrow. Stay, Olivia suggested, walking over to him. You can spend the night here. Perry shook his head. I can't. I have a client meeting at 8 in the morning. I have to get ready. Okay, Olivia agreed reluctantly. Then we'll continue the search tomorrow night? Yes, Perry kissed her. In the meantime, think about where else Elliot might have kept important documents. Maybe he had a special place. A hiding place? Olivia wondered. I don't recall. He was pretty straightforward about that sort of thing. Although, she paused, then continued, he'd lock himself in the garage sometimes. Said he was working on some project. I never went in there. I'm not interested in his technical toys. Check the garage tomorrow, Perry said. Thoroughly, I'll see what I can do on the legal side. They left the office with the lights off. I heard their footsteps on the stairs, then a quiet conversation in the hallway, and finally the sound of the front door closing. I waited a few more minutes, listening. The house was quiet, but I wanted to make sure Perry was really gone, and Olivia hadn't gone back into the study. When I heard the sound of the TV being turned on downstairs, I realized I could move. Carefully, I crawled out of my hiding place and stretched, stretching out my stiff muscles. Then, keeping my footsteps as quiet as possible, I went to the door and listened. The sound of the TV was coming from the living room, which meant Olivia was there and couldn't hear me. Now I had to find a way to get out of the house without being seen. I remembered that there was a window at the end of the hallway that looked out onto the roof of the outhouse. When I was young, I would have climbed out through it without a second thought, but at 68, such a trick could end in a broken neck. I looked around for another way out. The office door led into a corridor that led only to a stairway down to the hallway. Olivia would probably see me there. In desperation, I glanced at the window again. It might be the only way in. I walked over to it and opened it cautiously. The cool evening air rushed into the room. Looking out, I saw that the roof of the outhouse was about 2 meters below the window. It wasn't that high, but it was high enough to cause serious injury and a bad fall. The sound of the TV came from downstairs again, replaced by a commercial. There was no time to think. I stuffed the will into the inside pocket of my jacket, then carefully climbed over the windowsill, holding onto the frame. As I hung onto my arms, I felt my shoulders ache. Come on, Oswald, I thought. You've got to do it. For Elliot's sake. Gathering all my strength, I unclenched my fingers and fell to the roof of the outhouse. It wasn't a graceful landing. I rolled over, feeling the sharp pain in my knee, but I managed to stay on the roof and not roll down. After lying there for a few seconds, I carefully got up. My knee hurt, but nothing seemed to be broken. Now I had to get down from the roof to the ground. Fortunately, there was an old elm tree on the side of the outhouse, whose branches were almost touching the roof. I reached the tree and, clinging to the branches, slowly climbed down. Once the bark broke under my hand and I almost fell off, but eventually I reached the ground safely. Once on solid ground, I didn't hesitate. Ducking down, I circled the house and walked quickly toward the street where I had left my Toyota. Only once I was in the safety of the cabin did I allow myself to exhale. I had the will file with me. I now knew Olivia and Perry's plans. And just as importantly, I knew they were looking for the original will, which meant they didn't have it. Starting the car, I drove slowly away from the house, trying not to attract attention. I had to think about what I'd heard and decide what to do next. One thing I knew for sure, Olivia and Perry weren't getting Elliot's inheritance. I wouldn't let them twist my son's last will and testament. But I had to proceed carefully. They had the advantage of youth, Perry's law degree, and the year Olivia had spent searching the house for the original will. Returning home, I remembered Perry's words about the garage. Elliot was locked in there, working on some project. What if it wasn't just a hobby? What if he kept something important in there? Maybe including the original will. I needed to check the garage before Olivia did, and I didn't have much time left. She was going to check it out tomorrow. Stopping at a stoplight, I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Too late for a visit, but it was urgent. There was only one person I knew I could trust in this situation, an old friend from the IRS, Harold Baxter, who had retired as a private investigator. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it was him. Turning onto my street, I decided that I would call Harold as soon as I got home, and then we'd go to Elliot's garage together in the morning. I had to get ahead of Olivia and find the original will, if it was really there. After parking the car, I carefully got out, checking to see how badly my knee had been hurt in the fall. It hurt, but I could walk, a small price to pay for the information I'd gotten. As I walked up the porch steps, I suddenly realized that I felt truly alive for the first time in a long time. Since Elliot's death, I had existed as a shadow, moving on inertia, without purpose or meaning. Now I had a mission to protect my son's legacy from those who wanted to steal it. I knew Olivia and Perry wouldn't just stop. They were willing to go to great lengths to gain control of Elliot's company and all of his assets. But I was ready to fight too, and I had an advantage they didn't realize. They thought I was just a helpless old man, unable to resist their plans. They would soon find out how wrong they were. Harold Baxter hadn't changed in the 5 years I hadn't seen him. Still the same massive figure, square face with bushy eyebrows and attentive eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Only there was more gray hair. We sat in his small office on the second floor of an old building in downtown Villa Park. The name Baxter, Private Investigations, was written on the door in peeling paint. So your daughter-in-law and her lover are trying to circumvent your son's will. Harold tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. And you want me to help you find evidence of their collusion? I nodded, handing him the folder with the copy of the will I'd rescued from Elliot's house. I need to know everything I can about this Perry, and about what Olivia did with Elliot's money during his lifetime and after his death. Harold flipped through the will, his eyes narrowing as he reached the section on asset distribution. Not a bad score, he remarked. No wonder they're trying so hard. That sister-in-law of yours, you say she works for an insurance company? Yeah, as a receptionist. That's how she and Elliot met, at a conference her company was organizing. And Perry, a lawyer at the same insurance firm. At least that's what I gathered from their conversation. Harold wrote something down in his notebook. All right, I'll run them both. I'll start with the corporate databases. Look at financial records, cash flow. If she was withdrawing money, there should be traces. I nodded, relieved. Harold had always been the best analyst in our department. If anyone could dig up dirt on Olivia and Perry, it was him. How long is this going to take? I asked, pulling out my checkbook. Harold waved his hand. Put that away. You helped me with my son's tax problems in 2005. Consider me returning the favor. Thank you. I was touched by his gesture. But I still intend to pay you for your services. This isn't just a friendly request, Harold. This is serious business. We'll see, he replied evasively. First the results, then talk about money. What else can you tell me about this couple? I told him everything I knew about Olivia and Perry, including an overheard conversation about plans to forge a new will or claim there was none. Harold listened attentively, occasionally making notes. What about the original? He asked when I had finished. Any idea where Elliot might have kept it? Olivia mentioned a garage. She said Elliot often locked himself in there, working on some project. I wanted to check the place out, but I don't know how to get in. Olivia is going to check out the garage today. Harold looked at his watch. It's only 9 o'clock in the morning. If she's working full-time, we have until tonight. I could stop by under the guise of a gas inspector. Safety checks, routine inspections are routine. What if she's already there? Then we'll have to improvise, Harold grinned. Don't forget I've been dealing with suspected tax cheats for 30 years. I know how to convince people. I nodded, feeling the tension release a little. With Harold, I wasn't alone in this battle. What am I supposed to do while you take care of the garage and check their finances? I asked. Do you still have any banking connections left? Harold asked. Someone who could unofficially check Elliot and Olivia's accounts, I wondered. I'd gotten to know a lot of bankers over the years as a tax inspector. Some I helped with problems, others helped me identify evaders. One of them, Theodore Virginia, was now a manager at the Villa Park General Bank. There is one man, I said. I helped him when he was accused of complicity in tax evasion, proved he was unaware of a client's fraud. Great, Harold nodded. Get him on it. Find out what you can about the movements in Elliot and Olivia's accounts over the last year before and after his death. Especially look for large withdrawals or transfers. Okay, I stood up, feeling a surge of determination. I'll call you tonight. Yes, Harold shook my hand. And Oswald, be careful. Those two may be more dangerous than they look. I nodded and walked out of the office, down the creaky stairs and out into the street. The day was clear. The sun was warming up despite the early spring. I decided to walk to the bank. It was only 5 blocks away, and I needed to get my thoughts together. Theodore Virginie received me as soon as the receptionist announced my arrival. He came out from behind the desk of his spacious office, smiling broadly, and shook my hand firmly. Oswald Trenton, how many years, how many winters, Hurain, he exclaimed. To what do I owe this visit? Theodore was about 15 years younger than I was, but his hair had already turned gray. He was tall, trim, with sharp features, and always gave the impression of a man who knew exactly what he wanted from life. I need your help, Ted, I said bluntly when we sat down. It's about my late son. Theodore's smile faded. He knew of Elliot's death, of course. In a small town like Villa Park, news traveled fast. I'm sorry for your loss, Oswald. What can I do? I told him the situation, leaving out some details but emphasizing that I suspected financial fraud on Olivia's part. I need to know if she withdrew money from their joint accounts before Elliot died, and what happened to his assets after his death. Theodore rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You realize I can't officially give you that information? Bank secrecy? I'm not asking for an official report, Ted, I interrupted him. Just see what was going on. If you find anything suspicious, I'll go to the court for an official request. He paused for a moment, considering my request, then nodded. All right, Oswald. For your sake, I'll look into it. But it must remain between us. Of course, I nodded gratefully. When can you say something? Give me a couple of hours, Theodore answered, looking at his watch. It's 11 now. Come by 3. I'll try to gather information by then. I thanked him and walked out of the bank, feeling hope growing inside. If Olivia really was withdrawing money from Elliot's accounts, that could be a serious bargaining chip in my hands. I spent the next 4 hours in a small cafe nearby, going over everything I knew about Olivia and her relationship with Elliot in my mind. Were there any signs that she was planning to betray him while he was still alive? I thought back to their visits to my place together, the rare family dinners. Olivia was always polite but cold. She could give the appearance of a caring wife, but behind that mask I sensed calculation. Elliot, engrossed in his work and in love, didn't seem to notice. Or did he notice it but didn't want to admit it? In the last months before his death, he seemed tense, often canceling appointments, citing work. I put it down to the stress of running a growing company. Now I wondered if there was a problem in his marriage. At 3 o'clock sharp, I returned to the bank. Theodore met me with a serious expression and led me into his office, closing the door tightly. You were right, Oswald, he said without preamble. Your daughter-in-law is not clean. He spread out on the table several sheets of paper with printouts of bank transactions. Here, look. 6 months before Elliot's death, Olivia began making regular large withdrawals from their joint account, usually $5,000 to $10,000 in cash. In 6 months, she withdrew about $100,000. I went through the printouts, noting dates and amounts. Indeed, starting last June, Olivia had made large cash withdrawals twice a month. Where was that money going? I asked. Cash is hard to trace, Theodore shook his head, but I checked other accounts in her name. Look, he pointed to another printout. She'd opened a personal bank account in a neighboring town, Haven, 8 months before Elliot's death, and she funded it regularly. Not all the money she took out of the joint account, but a good portion of it. The rest she probably spent or kept in cash. Did Elliot know about this account? I asked. Not according to the paperwork. The account was in her name only, with no access for her spouse. I wondered, why would a woman secretly withdraw money from a joint account if not in anticipation of a divorce or other such situation? What was going on after Elliot's death? I asked. Theodore turned the page. This is where it gets even more interesting. After Elliot died, Olivia gained access to his personal accounts as an heiress and began actively transferring funds to her secret account in Haven. In the last year, she's transferred about $300,000 into that account. And his business? I asked. Trensoft? The company continues to operate. Revenues are stable, even growing. Olivia receives dividends as the owner of part of the shares. But the operational management is in the hands of Elliot's partner, one Brian Kislak. I nodded. Brian was a longtime friend of Elliot's. They'd founded the company together. I'd met him several times and he seemed honest and straightforward. What about software copyrights? I asked, remembering the clause in the will that gave them to me. Here's an interesting point. Theodore pulled out another document. 3 months after Elliot's death, there was an attempt to reissue the copyrights in the company's name. But the process stalled because of the lack of necessary documents. It seems that it required the consent of all the heirs named in the will. So Olivia had already tried to bypass Elliot's will, but had run into bureaucratic obstacles. That explained why she and Perry had been so desperate to find the original will. They wanted to destroy it and create a new version that didn't list me as an heir. Ari, one more thing, Theodore added, lowering his voice. I checked Elliot's insurance information. He had a $1 million death policy. Olivia was named as the beneficiary. She received the money a month after he died. And deposited it in her secret account? I suggested. No, Theodore shook his head. That's the weird part. The money was transferred to the account of one Perry Eckhart, in one installment. I froze. Perry got Elliot's insurance policy? This wasn't just financial fraud or probate fraud anymore. It looked like a conspiracy. Like Elliot's death was in their favor. Are you sure? I asked, feeling a chill go through my insides. Absolutely, Theodore nodded. I double-checked it. The transfer was made on January 3rd of this year. $1 million to Perry Eckhart's account at Chase Bank. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Olivia had started withdrawing money long before Elliot's death, probably preparing for a divorce. She had a secret lover, Perry, who had gotten his life insurance policy after Elliot's death. Now together they were trying to change the will to gain full control of the company and all the assets. It was a frightening picture, but I couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. I needed more hard evidence. Thank you, Ted, I said, gathering up the printouts. This is very valuable information. What are you going to do? He asked anxiously. If your suspicions are correct, these people could be dangerous. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. I need to gather more evidence first. Maybe find the original will. Be careful, Oswald. Theodore looked at me seriously. And keep me informed. If you need any more information about their finances, let me know. I thanked him and left the bank, clutching the folder of printouts tightly. The information I'd gotten confirmed my worst suspicions. Olivia and Perry weren't just lovers planning to skirt the will. Their relationship had begun long before Elliot's death, and they'd both benefited financially from his demise. The plan had matured in my mind by the evening of the next day after my meeting with Theodore and Harold. I sat in my office, laying out all the evidence I'd collected on the table. A copy of Elliot's will, bank statements showing Olivia's machinations, photographs of the documents Harold had found in the stash in the garage. Everything pointed to one thing. Olivia and Perry were working together to embezzle my son's inheritance. I could have gone straight to the police, but proving their guilt would have been difficult. Most of my evidence was unofficially obtained, and the bank information from Theodore would be inadmissible in court. Plus, a charge of will fraud would require proof that they were actually planning to forge the document, not just discussing the possibility. No, I needed to catch them red-handed. Make them make a mistake that would be irrefutable proof of their intentions. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Brian Kislak, Elliot's business partner. We weren't close, but I knew he genuinely respected my son and was grateful for the opportunity to be part of a successful company. Brian Kislak speaking. His energetic voice came through the phone. "Hello, Brian," I said. "This is Oswald Trenton, Elliot's father." "Mr. Trenton," he sounded surprised. "It's good to hear from you. How are you?" "Not bad, thanks." "Brian, I need to see you on an important matter. It's about Trent Soft and, Elliot's estate." There was a short pause. "Of course," he answered. "When is convenient for you?" "Tomorrow? Preferably not at the company office. Maybe at the Riverview Cafe downtown?" "Yeah. Would 10 o'clock tomorrow morning work?" he suggested. "Great," I agreed. "And Brian, please don't tell anyone about our meeting, especially Olivia." "Okay," his voice became wary. "Can I ask what this is about?" "I'll explain everything when I see you," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up and made another call to Martha Owens, the notary who had notarized Elliot's will. I'd found her contacts in the copy of the document. She, too, agreed to meet with me the next day, after my conversation with Brian. I then contacted Harold and outlined my plan. He approved of the idea but suggested a few important adjustments. "We need them to think the original will has been destroyed," he said. "Only then will they dare to commit forgery. And to do that, they have to check the stash and make sure the documents are no longer there." "Ehe, but how are we going to do that?" I asked. "You can't just take the papers out of the stash. They'll realize that someone beat them to it." "Not necessarily," Harold chuckled. "What if they think Elliot did it, or that the documents were destroyed by natural causes?" "Like what?" "Like a water leak," Harold suggested. "The garage is old. There could have been a problem with the pipes. Imagine Olivia finally finds the stash, but the documents are water, damaged beyond recognition." It was a good idea, but it required careful preparation. I needed to get back into Elliot's garage and stage this leak without attracting attention. Harold volunteered to help. The next morning, after Olivia left for work, he showed up at her house again, this time in his plumber's uniform. "Ma'am, we got a report of a possible leak in your neighborhood," he told the housekeeper who opened the door. "We need to check the pipes in the garage. It won't take long." Being the professional that he is, Harold quickly gained access to the garage. There he carefully removed the documents from the stash, took fresh photos of the entire contents, and then placed identical copies in their place, treated with a special compound to simulate water damage. He also placed a small tank of water in the cache that would leak during the day, creating the illusion of a recent leak. When Harold was finished, he called me with the report. "It's done," he said. "If Olivia checks the stash tonight, all she'll see are blurry, water-damaged papers, legible enough to realize it was a will, but too damaged to be used for legal purposes." "Great," I approved. "And the originals?" "I have them," Harold assured me. "I'll give them to you before your meeting with Brian." At 10 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in the Riverview Cafe waiting for Brian Kislak. In my pocket, I had the original documents from Elliot's stash, including his will and a notebook of his last thoughts. On the table in front of me, I spread copies of bank statements showing Olivia's financial machinations. Brian showed up at exactly the right time. Tall, thin, with disheveled dark hair and thin, rimmed glasses, he looked like a typical computer guy. But behind this unassuming appearance was a sharp mind and business acumen that made him a worthy partner for Elliot. "Mr. Trenton," he shook my hand and sat down across from me. "What can I do for you?" "Brian," I looked him straight in the eye. "What do you know about Olivia's plans for the company?" He frowned slightly. "Well, she owns half of Elliot's share, about 30% of the company. Occasionally attends board meetings, but mostly a passive investor." "Why do you ask?" "Because she plans to take full control of the company." I began to lay out the documents in front of him. "And to do so, she's willing to forge Elliot's will." Over the next hour, I told Brian everything I'd learned about Olivia and Perry's machinations. I showed him a copy of the real will, which listed me as the heir to Elliot's half share and all the copyrights. I explained how Olivia had withdrawn money from my son's accounts while he was still alive, how she'd gotten the insurance policy after his death and transferred it to Perry's account. And finally, I told him about an overheard conversation where they discussed plans to forge a new will. Brian listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, looking at the documents. I always felt there was something wrong with her, he said at last. Elliot was too infatuated with her to see the obvious. And in the last months before she died, he became suspicious, often asking me about the legalities of running the company in his absence. He knew, I nodded. Here's his notebook. The last entry made the day he died. He suspected that Olivia and Perry were plotting something against him. Brian read the entry and looked up at me. What do you want me to do? Help me catch them red-handed, I said. I've arranged for them to think the original will has been destroyed. Most likely in the coming days, they will try to present a forged will or claim that there is no will so that the inheritance will be distributed according to the law. And how exactly do you want to catch them? Brian asked. I need you to notify Olivia about the special board meeting in 3 days. Tell her that there's an important matter concerning the future of the company, and her presence is mandatory. She'll probably bring Perry with her as legal counsel. And then? And then, I smiled, the meeting will be attended by the notary who certified the actual will, the company lawyer, and me. When Olivia and Perry present a fake will, or claim there is none, we will expose their deception. Brian tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. It might work, he said at last. But what if they don't fall for it? What if they're careful and don't act so quickly? Then we have a backup plan, I nodded. You can hint to Olivia that some investors are interested in buying the company, and the deal should be done in the next few days. That will make them act faster. They won't want to miss an opportunity like this. Brian grinned. You know, Oswald, I'm beginning to realize who Elliot was such a cunning strategist into. All right, I'll do as you ask. The meeting's in 3 days, at the company office. After meeting Brian, I went to see the notary, Martha Owens. She was a middle-aged woman with a shrewd eye and confident movements. After listening to my story and reviewing the paperwork, she confirmed that the will, a copy of which I showed her, had indeed been drafted and witnessed by her. Elliot had actually picked up the original about 2 weeks before he died, she said. He said he wanted to make changes, but he never came back with a new version. Because he wasn't going to change the will, I explained. He just wanted to hide the original so Olivia couldn't destroy it. Martha agreed to attend the board meeting and authenticate the real will. She also offered to contact a lawyer specializing in probate matters who could also attend the meeting. If they do try to submit a fake will, that's a criminal offense, she said. You will need legal support. I thanked her and promised to keep her informed. The next 2 days passed intense anticipation. Brian said he had contacted Olivia to schedule an extraordinary board meeting, hinting at a possible sale of the company. She, as expected, said she would attend with her legal counsel. Harold, meanwhile, kept an eye on Elliot's house to see if Olivia had found the tainted documents in the stash. On the second day of surveillance, he reported that he saw Olivia and Perry enter the garage together and stay there for about an hour. When they came out, they both looked excited and were talking animatedly about something. I think they found the stash and the tainted documents, Harold said, and now they're deciding what to do next. Good, I nodded. Then they'll probably take the bait with the board meeting. On the morning of the third day, just before the meeting, Brian called me with the news. Olivia contacted me last night, he said. She said she had an important announcement to make to the board about Elliot's estate and the future of the company. She insisted that all the key people be present. She's got me, I said with satisfaction. She's probably going to present a fake will or claim there is no will. I think you're right, Brian agreed. Meet me at the office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I've already contacted the company's lawyer, and he'll be there too. I arrived at the Trentsoft office early, at the beginning of the second day. The modern glass building in the business part of the city was impressive in size and design. Elliot was proud of the place, saying it symbolized the company's transparency and innovation. Brian met me at the entrance and led me to a conference room on the top floor. The other board members were already gathered there. 5 people, including Brian himself. Also present were Martha Owens, the company's lawyer, Leonard Pitt, and a visiting expert in probate law, Amelia Green. I took a seat at the end of the table, away from the head seat where Olivia was to sit. Brian briefly brought those present up to speed, not going into the details of my suspicions, but explaining that there might be an attempt to fraud Elliot's will. At exactly 2 o'clock, the conference room door opened and Olivia walked in, accompanied by Perry. She looked confident, in a strict black suit, with perfect hair and makeup. Perry, tall and trim, kept a little behind, with a leather briefcase in his hands. "Good afternoon, everyone," Olivia said, glancing around the room. She froze for a moment when she saw me, but quickly pulled herself together. "Thank you for coming at my request. You said you had an important announcement to make about Elliot's inheritance," Brian reminded her. "We're all ears." Olivia nodded and made a sign to Perry. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document in a folder. "Yes, it concerns my late husband's will," Olivia said. "As you know, after his death, a will was discovered that divided his share of the company between me and his father, Oswald Trenton." She gave me a brief look of superiority. "Recently, however, I found a new will in Elliot's personal effects, dated at a later date. According to it, I am the sole beneficiary of Elliot's entire estate, including his share of the company and all the copyrights to the software he developed." Perry placed the folder with the document in front of Brian. "As you can see, the will is properly executed and notarized. This means that all of Elliot's previous orders are null and void." I watched this scene with inner satisfaction. They had indeed decided to commit forgery, as I had suspected. Now it was necessary to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Brian took the document and began to scrutinize it, then handed it to the company lawyer, who also looked over the paperwork. "This looks impressive," Brian said slowly, "but I have to ask a few questions. First, why wasn't this will submitted immediately after Elliot's death? It's been a year." "I didn't know it existed," Olivia replied smoothly. "Elliot must have hidden it in his garage, in a hiding place under the workbench. I only discovered it recently when I went through my husband's things." "And what happened to the previous will?" Leonard Pitt, the company lawyer, asked. "I believe Elliot destroyed it," Perry interjected. It's a common practice when making a new will." "I wonder," I said, raising my voice for the first time, "who probated this new will?" Perry smiled with a slight superiority. "Notary James Wilson of Haven. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 months ago, but his seal and signature on the document are genuine." "Very convenient," I remarked. "A dead notary can neither confirm nor deny the authenticity of a document." "What do you mean, Mr. Trenton?" Olivia asked coldly. "I mean that this will is a forgery." I stood up and opened my briefcase. "And I have proof." I laid out on the table the original copy of Elliot's will that Harold had retrieved from the stash. "This is my son's real will. It was hidden in a stash in the garage, but not under the workbench, but in another place that only Elliot knew about." "And me," came Martha Owen's voice. "I authorized this will and can attest to its authenticity." Elliot had indeed taken the original shortly before he died, not to change it, but to hide it from prying eyes. Olivia turned pale, and Perry jumped to his feet. "This is absurd," he exclaimed. "You can't prove that our document is forged." "Yeah, oh, but we can," smiled Amelia Green, a specialist in inheritance law. "First of all, Notary James Wilson never existed in Haven. Secondly, the seal on your document has characteristic signs of forgery. And third," she turned to Olivia, "you've just publicly attempted to commit the felony of will fraud." Olivia shifted her gaze from one face to the other like a hunted animal. "There must be some mistake," she said in a shaky voice. "I found that will in the garage, in the stash. It was there." "Yes, you found some papers in the stash," I agreed. "But they were not originals, but specially prepared copies, treated to look water damage. I retrieved the real documents earlier." "You had no right," Perry shrieked. "This is trespassing." "Perhaps," I replied calmly, "but that doesn't make your will authentic, nor does it invalidate the fact that you were trying to commit fraud." Brian beckoned to the guards, who stealthily entered the hall. "I think we should continue this conversation in front of the police," he said. "I've already contacted them. They'll be here in a few minutes." Olivia collapsed in her chair, her face contorted with rage and fear. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. "Nothing." "Oh, I think we can prove a lot of things," I said, laying the rest of the documents from the stash on the table. "Like the fact that Elliot knew about your affair with Perry. He has pictures, notes of your meetings, printouts of a mail correspondence." I looked at Perry. We also have evidence that Elliot's $1 million insurance policy was transferred into your account, Mr. Eckhart. A very interesting fact that will surely interest the police. Perry turned pale and cast an accusing glance at Olivia. I didn't know. She was the one who suggested it. I was just advising her on legal matters. Shut up, Perry, Olivia shouted. Just shut up. At that moment, two uniformed police officers entered the room. Brian briefly explained the situation and handed them all the documents, including the forged will. Mr. and Mrs. Eckhart, you'll have to come with us to the station to testify, one of the officers said. I'm not Mrs. Eckhart. Olivia was indignant. My name is Trenton. Not anymore, I said quietly. You lost the right to bear my son's name the moment you decided to betray his memory. Olivia gave me a hateful look, but she didn't say anything. As the police escorted her and Perry out of the hall, I felt a strange desolation rather than triumph. Revenge wouldn't bring Elliot back, wouldn't undo the mistakes I'd made in his lifetime. But at least I could protect his last will and punish those who wanted to deceive him even in death. You planned it well, Brian said, coming toward me. Elliot would be proud of you. I nodded, unable to speak. Proud? Maybe. But I'd rather he was alive and disappointed in me than dead, with me playing the role of protector of his legacy. When everyone had dispersed, I was alone in the conference room, looking out at the nighttime city through the panoramic windows. Somewhere out there, among the lights, was the house that Elliot had bought with such love. A house that now had no presence of him, his belongings, or even the memory of him. I decided that I would sell my share of the company to Brian. He's a decent man who will preserve Elliot's legacy better than I can. And the money didn't matter. All that mattered was that I honored my son's last request, protecting what he had created from those who wanted to steal it. Olivia and Perry were facing a trial, and most likely jail time. But even that didn't bring me satisfaction. Nothing could fill the void left by Elliot's death. I gathered my things and walked out of the company building. My old Toyota was waiting in the parking lot, as tired and shabby as I was. The road ahead was home, to an empty house where no one was waiting for me. But something had changed. I no longer felt like a helpless old man, existing by inertia. I had protected my son's memory, uncovered the truth, restored justice. And maybe now I could begin to live again, albeit with this unhealed wound in my heart. Olivia and Perry's trial took place 3 months after their arrest. All that time I lived like a dream, going to preliminary hearings, meeting with lawyers, testifying. Mechanical activities that brought neither satisfaction nor peace, only fatigue and a strange feeling of incompleteness, as if I was doing all this not for myself, but for someone else. The courtroom was full, the kind of stories that always attract attention in small towns. Journalists from the local paper, Elliot's acquaintances, just the curious. I sat in the front row, straight as a string, in my best suit, which had become too loose in recent months. Next to me was Harold Baxter, my constant companion in this whole affair. Olivia and Perry were led into the hall separately. She looked pale but still held her dignity, even in her prison clothes. He, on the other hand, seemed broken, with a wan gaze and slouching shoulders. Their lawyers sat side by side with equally tense faces, both realizing that the case was lost before it even began. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged will, financial fraud, attempted inheritance fraud, plus the testimony, mine, Brian's, Martha Owen's notary, and most importantly, Elliot's own notes from a hiding place in the garage where he documented his suspicions about his wife and her lover. The prosecutor, a young, energetic man named Daniel Cortez, presented all the facts clearly and ruthlessly. He spoke of betrayal, greed, breach of trust, how Olivia had systematically withdrawn money from Elliot's accounts during his lifetime in preparation for divorce, how after his death she transferred a $1 million insurance payout into Perry's account, how they tried to fake a will together to disinherit me. Defense attorneys tried to soften the charges. They talked about a misunderstanding, that Olivia really believed she had found her husband's new will, that the insurance transfer was just a bad business decision, not part of a criminal plan. But their arguments sounded unconvincing even to themselves. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke softly but firmly. I told them how I overheard Olivia and Perry talking in Elliot's office, how they planned to destroy the original will and create a forgery, how I discovered Olivia had been withdrawing money from her son's accounts long before his death. Mr. Trenton, the prosecutor asked, when did you first suspect that your daughter-in-law was acting dishonestly with your son's inheritance? I looked at Olivia. She met my gaze without a shadow of remorse, only with cold hatred. The day I went to retrieve Elliot's personal belongings from his house, I answered. Awesome. I noticed that a lot of his things were gone, and Olivia was strangely tense, as if she was afraid I'd find something. What did you do? Nothing at first. I didn't want to believe that my son's wife was capable of betrayal. But then I left the file with the copy of the will at Elliot's house and went back to get it. That's when I heard them talking about their plans to forge the document. Olivia was given a statement too. She denied all charges, insisting she was the victim of a misunderstanding and my revenge. Oswald Trenton never approved of our marriage to Elliot, she said with tears in her eyes that seemed so sincere that I almost believed them myself. He had always thought me unworthy of his son, and after Elliot died, he decided to take from me the last thing I had left, the memory of my husband and my livelihood. Perry was less artistic. He admitted to forging the will, but claimed he had acted under Olivia's influence, not fully understanding the illegality of his actions. I'm a lawyer in corporate law, not probate law, he excused himself. Olivia said it was common practice to reconstruct a lost will from memory. I believed her. Their testimony only made it worse, showing how easily they shifted blame on each other. The jury deliberated for a short 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, announced the verdict. Olivia received 4 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and financial fraud. Perry got 3 years for accessory after the fact. In addition, both were ordered to pay substantial fines and restitution. As they were being led out of the hall, Olivia turned to me one last time. You won't find peace, old man, she said quietly, but loud enough for me to hear. You've taken everything from me, but that won't bring your son back. I didn't answer. What could I say? She was right. My victory brought me no joy or peace. Only the emptiness and bitterness of realizing how much time I'd wasted not trying to really bond with Elliot while he was alive. After the trial, the long process of probate began. According to Elliot's will, I was to inherit half of his share in Trentsoft and all the copyrights to the software he had developed. The house and personal belongings were to be left to Olivia, but due to her conviction and confiscation, the court gave them to me as next of kin. Brian Kislak has offered to buy out my share of the company. I realize that running a business is not something you want to do, Oswald, he said during our meeting at the Trentsoft office. I'm willing to offer a fair price and guarantee that Elliot's legacy will be preserved. I wondered. Elliot's stake in the company was worth millions, money that I, a lonely retiree, didn't need. But just selling it seemed like a betrayal of my son's memory. Don't rush into a decision, Harold advised me when I shared my doubts with him. For in a waiting, there might be a way to retain control of the company without being directly involved in it. He was right. After consulting with lawyers, I decided to set up a trust to manage my share of the company after my death. Brian was appointed as trustee with operational decision-making authority, but strategic control remained with me. In this way, Elliot's legacy was protected and the company received stable management. I also transferred the software copyrights to the trust, with the stipulation that a portion of the proceeds be used for scholarships for computer science students. Elliot had always believed in the importance of education and supported young programmers. It was my way of continuing his work. Things were more complicated with the house. I couldn't bring myself to live there. Too many memories, too much pain. But I didn't want to sell it either. In the end, I decided to rent the house out, with the proceeds also going to charity. I sorted through Elliot's personal belongings myself. It was excruciating going through his books, photos, notes. Each item reminded me of him, of moments we could have shared, but didn't because of my pride and his resentment. In his bedroom, I found a box of children's drawings and crafts, things he had kept over the years. Among them was the card I'd given him for his 8th birthday. To my son, my pride. Love, Dad. Such simple words that I almost never said out loud to him. I sat on his bedroom floor holding that card, and for the first time since his death, I allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet tears of an old man, but sobs that rose from somewhere deep inside me, shaking my whole body. I cried for the lost time, for the unspoken words, for the chances I had missed. When the tears finally dried up, I felt a strange relief. It was as if the heaviness I'd been carrying around for years had lessened a little. It didn't disappear completely. Such wounds never fully heal, but it became more bearable. A month after the trial, I made another decision: to sell my house in Villa Park and move. There were too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. I needed a new place, a fresh start, even at my age. I chose a small coastal town 300 kilometers from Villa Park. Mildred had always liked the sea air, and we had dreamed of moving there someday. Now I was fulfilling that dream alone, but it still felt right. The house I bought was modest: 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, a small garden, and an ocean view from the veranda. Just enough room for a lonely old man and the occasional ghosts of his past that still followed him wherever he went. Before leaving Villa Park, I made one last visit to the cemetery where Mildred and Elliot were buried. Their graves were next to each other, under an old oak tree that cast shade on hot days. I placed flowers, lilies for Mildred, her favorite, and simple wildflowers for Elliot, who always preferred natural beauty to fancy. "I'm leaving," I said, standing between their graves. "I hope you'll understand. I need a fresh start, as much as I can at my age." The wind rustled in the leaves of the oak tree, and that sound was the only answer. But I thought that somewhere deep down I felt their understanding, and maybe even their approval. On my last night in Villa Park, I had dinner with Harold and Brian at a little Italian restaurant that Elliot loved. We talked about the future, about plans, carefully avoiding the subject of the past. I felt grateful to these 2 men who had helped me during the most difficult time of my life. "What's going to happen to Olivia after she's released?" Brian asked when we were about to leave. I shrugged. "I don't know, and frankly, I don't want to know. That chapter is closed to me." "They say she lost everything," Harold said. "Money, reputation, connections. Perry got his law license revoked too. They'll both start from scratch when they get out." "So will I replied quietly. "Only I have the advantage of a clear conscience." The next morning, I loaded my few belongings into the old Toyota and took one last look back at the house where I had lived most of my life. It was where Mildred and I had raised Elliot, where our happy years and our fights, our dreams and our disappointments had been. Saying goodbye was hard, but necessary. The drive to the new house took about 5 hours. I drove leisurely, stopping when I wanted to rest or just to look at the scenery. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. The new house greeted me with silence and the smell of fresh paint. The real estate agent had left the keys under the mat as we'd agreed. I stepped inside, looking around the empty rooms that would soon become my new sanctuary. The first thing I did was lay out the pictures: Mildred, Elliot, the 3 of us together. I arranged the books on the shelves, hung the clothes in the closet. Simple mechanical acts that gradually turned someone else's space into a home. In the evening, I sat on the veranda, watching the sun set into the ocean. The sound of the waves was soothing, reminding me of the eternity and transience of human life at the same time. I thought about what had happened over the past year: Elliot's death, Olivia's betrayal, the fight for justice, and finally my escape from the past. Was it really an escape? Or maybe a new beginning? I didn't know. At 69, starting over seemed strange, almost ridiculous, but something inside me said it was the right path. The first weeks in a new city were both daunting and liberating. No one here knew me, didn't know my story. I was just an older man who had recently moved and was now settling into a new place. It gave a strange sense of freedom, the ability to be whoever I wanted to be, unconstrained by the expectations and prejudices of others. I started small. I found the nearest library, signed up for a senior citizen art class, and began taking daily walks along the waterfront. Gradually, I made acquaintances: the owner of a small cafe on the corner, a lighthouse keeper, a couple of similarly lonely old men with whom we sometimes played chess in the park. None of them knew about my past, about the tragedy with Elliot, about the struggle with Olivia, and I was in no hurry to tell them. Here I was, just Oswald, a former tax inspector, a chess enthusiast, and an aspiring artist. It wasn't a lie, just an incomplete truth. Once a month, Brian sent me a report on Trentsoft's business. The company was thriving. The software Elliot had developed continued to make a profit. The trust I had set up was working as it should, providing scholarships for students and preserving my son's legacy. Occasionally, I received letters from Harold, with news from Villa Park. In one, he mentioned that Olivia had been paroled for good behavior after 2.5 years in prison. She left town right after she got out without telling anyone where she was going. Perry had gotten out early too, and was rumored to have gone to Europe, where he had some relatives. This news caused me nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no concern. It was as if it was about the characters in a book I had long ago read and put aside. Their story was no longer my story. It had been 3 years since I had moved to this coastal town. I had turned 72, and although my health had failed me at times, I was generally feeling better than I expected at my age. The salty sea air, regular walks, and new hobbies kept not only my body, but also my spirit alive. I learned to paint, not brilliantly, but well enough to find pleasure in the process. My watercolors of seascapes were even exhibited in a local gallery in the amateur artisan section. Elliot would have been surprised. He always thought I was too rational for art. One day, while going through the mail, I discovered a letter with no return address. Inside was just a piece of paper with a few lines written in neat handwriting. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that Elliot really did love you, even when you were distant from each other. He spoke of you with respect and hope for reconciliation. That may be the only truth I can tell you." Oh, I stared at that letter for a long time, not knowing how to feel. Olivia had found me, recognized my new address. Why? To try to manipulate me again? Or was it a sincere desire to tell one last truth? Finally, I folded the letter and tucked it away in my desk drawer, the place where I kept Elliot's photos and other memorabilia. Not out of sentimentality, but simply as another piece of the mosaic of my life. I didn't answer the letter, not out of anger or resentment, just because I had nothing to say. Our paths had diverged, and it was better for both of us. That evening, I sat on the veranda with my sketchbook, trying to capture the sunset over the ocean. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, with light strokes of clouds highlighted in pink and gold. A perfect moment that will never be repeated exactly. I thought about Elliot, about Mildred, about the life that could have been and the one that was, of loss and gain, of pain and healing, about how strangely life works. Sometimes you have to lose everything to start over. My hand moved across the paper, leaving lines and colors, creating an image of sea and sky. Imperfect, like everything human, but sincere. Like my new life here, far from the past, but still bound to it by invisible threads of memory and love. I haven't forgiven Olivia. I never would. But I no longer let my hatred for her define my life. She stayed in the past, with a ruined reputation and no funds as planned. And I moved on, slowly, uncertainly, but still forward. The sunset was fading, coloring the world a deep blue. Soon the first stars would appear. I closed the album, put away my brushes, and just sat, watching the change of day and night. The eternal rhythm of nature that continues despite our tragedies and triumphs, our losses and gains. There was a wisdom in that, a comfort in that. The world goes on, and so do I.